She walked in with a notebook and a name. He greeted her with a smirk and a bottle of water to the face. No shouting, no threats, just an old black woman in a lavender dress, drenched, humiliated, and dismissed in the very building her son dedicated his life to. Why? Because in Ashmore, Georgia, being elderly, black, and certain of your truth was enough to be treated like a trespasser. But here's what Deputy Beckett didn't know. The woman he just soaked was the mother of the sheriff, the same sheriff who now had the power and the will to tear the whole system apart, not out of vengeance, out of love, and out of justice. Where are you watching from? Could your town survive a story like this? Is justice where you live, or just a word people stop believing in? Now, let's begin the story of what happened the day Justice came to Ashmore, wearing house slippers and a lavender dress. In Ashmore, Georgia, a small town nestled against the southern foothills, Monday morning passed like any other. Dew still clung to wooden porch eaves, and cicadas, restless after a night of rain, had yet to quiet down. But at 113 Hawthorne Street, something unusual had just happened. Ruth Delaney, 79 years old, with snow-white hair and a frame so slight the wind might carry her away, had just opened her front door and stepped outside. She wore a lavender dress, the same one her late husband once said made her look like the first light of spring. In her left arm, she clutched a soft leather handbag. Inside were only three things: an old photograph, a worn notebook, and a note her son had written long ago. "Mama, if anything ever happens, go straight to the police station. We'll be there." And today, she had decided to do just that. No one saw her leave. Nurse Clarice Liddell, the woman who cared for her, had stepped out back to take a phone call. When she returned, the front door was ajar and Ruth was gone. The police station was just 6 blocks away, less than a mile. But for a body that had endured 2 hip replacements and a lifetime of sacrifice, that walk stretched out with every step. Ruth carried no phone, wore no hat, just a conviction and a quiet fear she couldn't name. The morning breeze swept through the sleepy street, laced with the scent of cut grass and rain, still clinging to the pavement. Ruth walked slowly, each step steady, her eyes lit with a quiet fire, as if someone had flipped a switch inside her chest. Something wasn't right. She didn't know how, but she knew Jeremiah, her son, was in danger. Every mother knows that feeling. Sometimes you don't need proof, just instinct. The people of Ashmore were used to seeing Ruth every Sunday at First Baptist Church, always sitting in the third pew, always offering a gentle smile with her handshake. But today, they merely caught a glimpse of her passing by. The soft pat of her house slippers on the sidewalk, the hem of her lavender dress fluttering in the wind, and then looked away as if trying to ignore something they weren't ready to face. In front of the sheriff's office stood 6 worn concrete steps, the paint chipped away in patches. Ruth paused at the bottom step, placing her hand on her hip to catch her breath. But when she looked up at the weathered brass sign that read ASHMOR County Sheriff's Department, her eyes shone. She whispered to herself, as if speaking across time, "He's in there. Mama's here now, Jim." Inside, phones rang. Keyboards clacked. The scent of strong coffee lingered, and fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead. A world entirely unfamiliar to her. But to Ruth, this was sacred ground. It was a place where her son, the boy she raised on laundry wages and humble meals, stood watch over the piece of town. And she had come, not because she feared an accident or had read some terrible news, but for a reason so simple it could only be absolute. A mother's heart is never silent when her child is in need. The glass door slid open as Ruth Delaney stepped into the Ashmore County Sheriff's Department. She paused for a moment, as if entering holy ground, not for what it looked like, but for what it meant. This was where her son, Jeremiah Delaney, had devoted his life to keeping justice alive. The air inside was colder than she expected. Fluorescent lights bounced off the gray tile floor. A few people were scattered around the waiting area, holding folders, eyes drifting in and out of thought. A child was crying over a scraped hand while his mother fumbled at the intake desk, asking for a form. Everyone turned to look when Ruth entered, not because she demanded attention, but because in a place like this, an elderly black woman in a lavender dress her steps trembling yet deliberate, was a rare sight. She made her way to the reception desk. Behind it sat Deputy Troy Beckett, a large white man in his 40s with a patchy, half-shaved beard. He was scrolling through his phone, one Bluetooth earpiece tucked into his ear. "Excuse me, my son, Jeremiah Delaney, does he work here?" Ruth asked softly but clearly. Beckett didn't look up. "Excuse me," she repeated, her voice firmer. "I'm looking for my son, Sheriff Delaney." He lowered the phone, eyed her like she'd just said something offensive. "Sheriff," he smirked. "You think your son's a sheriff here?" "It's not what I think," Ruth replied gently. "It's what I know." A few people in the waiting area began to pay attention. Beckett stood, leaning on the counter, eyes narrowing with contempt. "You're disturbing the peace, you know that? This isn't a retirement home you wandered into." Ruth kept calm, but her hand tightened around the strap of her purse. "I only want to see my son, and I only want you to leave before I have to call backup." A woman near the entrance shielded her child's eyes, unable to believe what she was seeing. "You can call whoever you want," Ruth said, eyes steady on Beckett. "I'm not going anywhere." Beckett exhaled sharply, turned to the adjacent desk, and grabbed a half-empty water bottle lying there. He shook it slightly and then, like no one else was watching, unscrewed the cap, walked around the desk, and stepped directly in front of Ruth. She didn't have time to step back. In a strange, suspended moment, the cold water splashed across her head, like a slap from the very system she once trusted. Her hair soaked instantly, white strands clinging to her forehead. The lavender dress darkened, heavy and drenched. Water splattered onto the floor in loud slaps. The plastic bottle rolled once and stopped at Beckett's feet. "Eyes open now," he muttered. "Mother the sheriff." "Huh." No one spoke. A boy, about 7 years old, tugged on his mother's sleeve and whispered, "Why did he do that to her?" Ruth didn't wipe her face. She simply stood there, water still dripping from her chin onto the cold tile floor. But in her eyes, through the strands of wet hair clinging to her face, through the humiliation spreading like a stain, was something else. Dignity. The kind no one could wash away with water. And when the door at the end of the hallway burst open, footsteps heavy, deliberate, Ruth whispered like a prayer, "Jeremiah?" The first sound to break the deathly silence of the waiting room was the clang of the steel door swinging open, heavy, final, like a verdict entering the room. Jeremiah Jem Delaney, current sheriff of Ashmore County, appeared like a thunderclap in a dark sky. No one had seen him coming, but everyone felt in the moment he stepped in, his police cap still in hand, black hair slightly tousled by wind, but his face showed no emotion. Only his eyes like molten steel, swept across the room. And then he saw her. Ruth Delaney stood by the reception desk, silver hair soaked, delicate curls clinging to her cheeks like morning veils. Her lavender dress clung to her frame, blotchy water stains distorting the floral pattern into something torn and broken. She didn't cry, but her eyes, those eyes cut straight into Jem's heart. He strode down the hallway without a word, without a question. Other officers in the room stepped aside instinctively, as if moved by a force of nature. "Troy!" Jem called, not loudly, but with the weight of lead. Deputy Troy Beckett stood barely 3 steps away, mouth still slightly agape after his reckless act, the empty water bottle still in hand. When he heard Jem's voice, he turned, and he knew. His face went pale, hands trembling, like someone realizing too late that he had just poured water over the head of the sheriff's mother. Jem didn't even look at him. He simply removed his uniform jacket and stepped toward Ruth, gently draping it over her shoulders, the same way she used to wrap a blanket around him when he had fevers as a child. "Mama," he whispered, "I'm here now." Ruth said nothing, but her frail hand clutched his wrist like a lifeline after a flood. Then Jem turned to face Beckett. "You have 30 seconds to explain," he said, eyes unblinking. "Sheriff, I didn't know she was your mother. She wandered into the staff area. I just meant to give her a warning." "A warning?" Jem repeated, voice like ice. "You think pouring water on the head of a 79-year-old woman is a warning?" Troy opened his mouth, but no words came out. Jem took one step forward, close enough that he could have touched the name tag on Beckett's chest with a single reach. "You're not suspended because you didn't recognize her as my mother," he said quietly. "You're suspended because you didn't recognize her as a human being." The room went dead silent. Jem turned to Officer Raina Collins, one of the youngest on the force. "Raina, escort Deputy Beckett to personnel holding. Disarm him, revoke all system access. And no one, I repeat no one, is to have private contact with him until a formal investigation begins." "Yes, Sheriff," Raina replied, stepping forward immediately. Troy stiffened as he was led away. Everyone watched, as if witnessing a ship slowly sinking. Jem brought his mother to the back, to the officer's break room. He helped her into a leather chair, retrieved a towel from the supply cabinet, and gently dried her hair with feather-light touches. The room held only the two of them. "Mama," Jem said, his voice hoarse, "I'm sorry." She placed her hand on his, no words needed, because in her heart, her son had done the right thing, not as a sheriff, but as a man who knew the meaning of dignity. And in Ashmore, this was no longer just a family story. It was a day justice began knocking on every office door. The mood in Ashmore 3 hours after the incident felt like a brush fire smoldering under dry grass, needing only the smallest spark to erupt, and that spark came faster than anyone imagined. A 46-second video recorded by a 15-year-old boy sitting in the corner of the waiting room captured the entire moment Deputy Troy Beckett poured water over Ruth Delaney's head. The boy had no idea what he was holding. He only filmed because it felt weird. But Way got home and posted it to TikTok with a caption, "Did that dude just dump water on the sheriff's mom?" The clip racked up over 1 million views in just 3 hours. Local news outlets immediately picked up the story. Larger networks, WSB-TV, Fox 5 Atlanta, were on it within a day. What began as a personal act of misconduct quickly became a public reckoning. What's really happening in Ashmore? Inside the Ashmore County Sheriff's Department, the storm was just as fierce. Among the senior officers, those who had once served with Jem's father, the late Sheriff Elijah Delaney, murmurs filled the break room. Some believed Jem had overreacted emotionally. Others stayed silent. But their eyes said it all. They knew there was no excusing what had happened. They were just afraid of the change it demanded. Raina Collins was the first to speak up during the closed-door meeting. She slammed her hand on the table, cutting through the tension. If that had been any other woman, not the sheriff's mom, would we still be silent? Really? Is this how we protect our reputation? Through complicity? A heavy silence followed. Then an older officer, Vernon Briggs, finally spoke slowly. "We're not silent because we're complicit. We're silent because we know this system doesn't spare anyone who tries to break it." Right then, a new internal alert appeared on the department's main screen. Notification from County Administration Office. Emergency meeting with Sheriff Jeremiah Delaney and full command staff at 4 p.m. Less than 30 minutes later, inside the Ashmore County Government meeting room, Jem stood before a room filled with representatives, law enforcement council members, civil attorneys, and, most unexpectedly, Mrs. Etta Mae Vaughn, 84 years old, a retired high school teacher who had once been treated rudely by Beckett 2 years prior. She carried an old leather-bound notebook and declared before everyone, "I kept records, dates, words, behavior, and I'm not the only one. We used to stay silent because we thought no one was listening. Today, I speak up because I know the sheriff won't look away." The room held its breath. Jem stepped forward and took the notebook with both hands, as if receiving a new constitution. He turned to Commissioner Harriet Crossley and stated clearly, "I don't care who it is or how many years they've served. If there's anyone like Beckett left in this department, I will find them. I'm not rebuilding this place for my mother. I'm doing this for people like Mrs. Vaughn, people who were hurt and never acknowledged." The entire room rose to their feet, not to applaud, but because the truth finally had a place to speak. And Jem knew this was only the beginning. This fight wasn't just about a family's honor. It was about the soul of the entire town of Ashmore. The internal affairs meeting room at the Ashmore Police Department was usually so quiet you could hear a pen touch paper. But that Monday morning, the air was thick, as if something invisible was being stripped bare. Jeremiah Jem Delaney sat at the head of the table, not in uniform, just a white shirt with the sleeves roll high to the elbows, but the authority radiated from his gaze. Across from him sat Lieutenant Gwen Travers from the Georgia State Internal Investigations Unit. She was known to be firm, sharp as a scalpel, but even she had to admit today, what's happening in Ashmore, this isn't just about a single abuse of power. It's a structure of complicity, a form of organized silence. Jem nodded. I want every internal file reopened. All of it, from the past 10 years. You know that's going to cause major backlash, right? Travers asked. That's exactly why I have to do it. Jem replied. If I can't clean my own house, I don't deserve to sit here. The Troy Beckett incident had stirred up deeper undercurrents. The video of water being poured over Ruth's head had reached neighboring states. In its wake came hundreds of responses, letters, even handwritten notes from people who'd once been humiliated and never knew where to send their stories. One such letter came from Calvin Red Henry, a retired truck driver who had once been pulled over by Beckett for driving through town after 10 p.m. He had filed a complaint at the time, but it had gone missing. Now he sent it again. And this time, Jem personally picked up the phone. I want to hear from you, Jem said. Directly. No intermediaries. Red hesitated, then sighed. I'm an old man, Sheriff, but if you're really listening, this is the first time I felt hope. Within 2 weeks, over 37 old case files were pulled from the basement archives, where the dust was so thick that every cabinet opened seemed to spill out a layer of forgotten time. Travers and her team worked nonstop, combing through every report, and what they uncovered left the entire unit stunned. Many of the reports bore the same signature, Beckett, but the language read like a copy-paste script. Subject displayed non-compliant behavior, required firm response, repeated over and over. Travers looked up from the files, her brow furrowed. This isn't police language. This is a language of justifying guilt. Jem stood up and walked to the large corkboard mounted on the wall. He began pinning up photos, excerpts, testimonies, not for display, but to expose exactly where the rot in the system began. From now on, Jem declared, every call reporting officer behavior will be recorded, archived, and reviewed weekly. I will personally go through every complaint if I have to. Just then, the door opened. Etta Mae Vaughn, the woman whose presence had silenced the waiting room a week prior, stepped in, holding her worn notebook. I've got a few more names, she said quietly, placing the book on Jem's desk. They thought I wouldn't remember, but I do. Every face. Jem looked at her, then at the many eyes watching him. He nodded. Then today, we begin with truth. And we don't stop until justice walks every hallway of this building again. That evening's Ashmore City Council meeting wasn't like any other before. The chamber was packed, the air tight as wire. On one side sat the council, mostly older white men and women tied to the town since its days as a timber hub. On the other side, angry residents with handmade signs and eyes that had long run out of patience. And in the middle stood Jeremiah Jem Delaney alone. He didn't take the guest seat. He stood at the front, holding a clip folder, eyes fixed like hammered nails. I'm not here to make a political statement, Jem began, his voice clear through the microphone, echoing into the breathless room. I'm here to answer for my actions. And if transparency makes anyone uncomfortable, that's the surest sign we're on the right track. A dry cough broke the silence. From Council Chair Martin Cresswell, 68, a retired businessman and one-time campaign donor to Jem. He pressed his palm on the table, face stern. Sheriff Delaney, he said, try to remain composed. You're creating chaos. Complaints are pouring in from every direction. The department's image is tarnished, and now you're demanding a decade's worth of records be reviewed. This is a political storm. Jem didn't blink, then call it what it is, a storm of truth. A few quiet chuckles rippled through the audience. A young woman in the back raised her phone, live streaming the event. Jem knew it. He didn't exploit it, but he didn't avoid it either. We don't need someone tearing down the system he's supposed to lead, Councilwoman Imogene Lattimore interjected. We need stability. Jem nodded slightly. as if truly considering her words. Then he responded, calmly and firmly, "Stability is not the price we pay with silence. If a system only works when we close our eyes, then it needs changing, not preserving." At the back of the room, Lieutenant Gwen Travers stood watching, arms crossed. She leaned toward her aide and murmured, "He's turning accusations into a manifesto." The aide smiled, and the town is listening. Back in the center of the room, Jem held up the folder. "I'm not here to ask for permission to do my duty. I'm here to inform you. I will continue the investigation. I will publish the findings. And if any of you think you can intimidate me, remember this. There is nothing more dangerous than a son forced to protect his mother from the very system he once believed in. Silence." Chairman Cresswell tapped his gavel lightly. Message received. Meeting adjourned. As Jem stepped out of the chamber, a 10-year-old boy, son of a local resident, ran up to him and asked, "Mister, are you scared?" Jem knelt down slightly, smiled, and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "I am, but I'd be more scared if I did nothing." And then he walked on, with the whole town behind him, and a promise still waiting to be fulfilled ahead. That night, a gentle rain fell over Ashmore, each drop tapping the tin roof of the sheriff's office, like a warning beat for something about to break. Jeremiah, Jem, Delaney sat alone in his office, desk lamp casting a warm circle of light over the reopened case files he'd ordered after the incident with his mother. Beside him, a cold cup of coffee. In front of him, the latest internal affairs report, detailing at least 12 cases that showed signs of being deliberately softened through administrative wording. At exactly 9:03 p.m., a knock at the door broke the silence. "No appointment. No notice. Come in," Jem said, his voice low and weary. The door opened, and in walked none other than Deputy Troy Beckett. After 3 days in internal custody by the sheriff's order, he had been temporarily released for the investigation. But he was no longer an officer, just a man carrying weight he could no longer bury. No uniform, just a faded denim shirt and wrinkled khakis. Dark circles under his eyes, wet hair from the rain, and a face that couldn't hide its tension. He stepped in, closed the door, and stood still like a man who knew he had nowhere left to run. "What do you want?" Jem asked, not looking up from the file. "I'm not here to beg. I'm not here to shift blame," Beckett said, voice hoarse. "I'm here to tell the truth, for the first time in years." Jeremiah looked up slowly, set his pen down. "I'm listening." Beckett sat across from him. He pulled a folded piece of paper from inside his shirt pocket. Creased, wore at the edges, the ink smudged. He placed it on the desk and slid it forward. "This is a list of incidents I either witnessed or was involved in. Some I stayed quiet about. Some I committed myself." Jeremiah didn't touch the paper yet. "Why now?" Beckett lowered his head. "Because what happened with Mrs. Ruth wasn't the breaking point. The breaking point was my daughter coming home from school and asking me, 'Daddy, are you the kind of cop people are scared of?' And I didn't know what to say." Then Jeremiah unfolded the paper. Names, dates, details, some he recognized, but most were new. A string of violations long buried, part of a system that had been handled internally until no one dared ask anymore. At that moment, an unexpected event broke the silence. An alarm blared from downstairs. Not a fire alarm, but the internal emergency alert. Jeremiah sprang up and grabbed his radio. "What's going on?" A voice crackled through from the holding cells. "Sheriff, inmate in cell 3A is seizing. We need medical support immediately." Jem bolted out the door like a gust of wind. Beckett didn't hesitate. He ran after him. They charged down the stairwell, through a hallway reeking of disinfectant. In the cell was a middle-aged man, Carlton Green, arrested for resisting arrest in a case that had signs of wrongful accusation. He now lay on the floor, convulsing, frothing at the mouth. Jeremiah dropped to his knees, clearing the man's airway while a nurse sprinted in with emergency supplies. "We need an AED now," he yelled. Beckett stood frozen, staring at the man, one of the names on the list he'd just given Jem, lying there between life and death. His face drained of color. After 10 chaotic minutes, Carlton stabilized. But the last look he gave Beckett, half-conscious, eyes fogged, was like a mirror reflecting guilt never spoken aloud. Back in the office, Jeremiah closed the door and looked at Beckett, who was now trembling beside the chair. "Do you get it now?" Jeremiah asked, his voice no longer angry, just heavy. "This isn't about reputation. This is about human lives." Beckett nodded, tears threatening to fall. "I get it." Jeremiah filed a note into a classified folder, voice low. "Internal Affairs will verify every word. And you, from this moment on, are suspended. No badge, no gun, no shield, only the truth." Beckett didn't resist. He only nodded. And for the first time in years, he walked out not as a cop, but as a man beginning to learn how to carry the weight of his actions. As Beckett left Jeremiah, Jem, Delaney sat in silence for a while, staring at the updated file on his desk. Outside, the rain still fell, drops tapping steadily against the window like a metronome, reminding him that time waits for no one. One more step, and there would be no turning back. The next day, Ashmore Police Department's Internal Affairs room resumed what had become an unprecedented investigation. On the table was Beckett's list, now enlarged, annotated with different markers. Lieutenant Gwen Travers and her Georgia State investigative team were cross-checking every entry, every date, every name mentioned. Per Jem's order, Beckett had submitted additional handwritten reports, detailing the incidents he had witnessed or participated in. Some were verbal misconduct, others were far worse. Excessive force during restraint, altered crime scene reports, and even one case of intimidating a witness to protect a fellow officer. Over 72 hours, the team meticulously verified Beckett's accounts against archived security footage, long-dash misplaced complaints, and officer shift logs. The results were truly staggering. Of the 18 incidents listed, at least 11 were found to have corroborating or fully verified evidence. Among those, 6 cases involved Beckett directly, either as the perpetrator of misconduct or as a witness who chose to stay silent. These incidents spanned over 7 years, mostly during the tenure of the previous chief. One of the most damning pieces of evidence was audio recovered from a supposedly lost body camera file. The recording, restored from a backup hard drive, captured Beckett aggressively threatening a 17-year-old black teenager simply because he didn't answer fast enough. That afternoon, Lieutenant Travers placed the audio file in front of Jem. "If this is your officer," she said, her tone now firm with certainty rather than suspicion, "you don't need enemies." Jem sat motionless for a few seconds. He looked at the list, at the red marks, each one representing a person, a fracture in the fabric of the community. Then he sighed, not from exhaustion, but because it was time to end a chapter that should never have existed. He called Beckett into the room. There was no rage, no shouting, just silence between two men. "I've reviewed everything," Jem said, "and I believe that part of you truly wants to change. But that doesn't erase what you've done or what you chose not to do." Beckett nodded, his eyes red. He didn't argue. "I've signed the termination order, effective immediately." Beckett stood, slowly extended his hand. "I understand, and I accept it." As he walked away, Jem watched him go. There was no fury left in his eyes, only the quiet sorrow of a leader forced to sever ties with a broken part of the system that once held him back. Then he turned back to his office and placed his hand on the reform file, awaiting his signature. A new chapter was beginning, rooted in truth, and this time, no one would stand on the sidelines. That afternoon, Jem gathered the entire department on the second floor briefing room. No microphone, no slides, just him, standing at a whiteboard with a marker, drawing a large circle. "This is Ashmore," he said, "and this," he placed a red at the center, "is the police department. Starting today, we don't stand above this town. We stand within it, accountable for every decision, every mistake, and every hope the people place in us." A young officer hesitantly raised his hand. "Sheriff, where exactly does change begin?" Jem looked at him, then turned back to the board. He wrote 4 large words: audit, oversight, response, discipline. First, regular audits. Every complaint file, citation, and arrest will be reviewed quarterly by an independent panel, including community members. Second, civilian oversight will install full coverage body cameras with footage stored for 90 days, no deletions. Third, response. Every complaint must be acknowledged within 10 business days. And last, transparent discipline. Anyone who violates policy will be held accountable publicly. No exceptions. No shielding. A few people nodded. Others remained silent, their eyes heavy with thought. But no one stood up to object. The air in the room remained thick until Officer Darrell, the towering man often called the Quiet Giant, unexpectedly raised his hand. "I have a question, Sheriff." "Go ahead, Darrell." "What about the ones who stayed silent, out of fear, habit, or thinking they couldn't make a difference? Do they still have a chance?" Jem looked around the room, locking eyes with every face. Then he spoke slowly. "They do, but that chance doesn't come from me. It comes from them. Anyone who truly wants to change, the door is open. But for those who want to keep things the way they are, you're welcome to walk out right now. No one's holding you back." No one moved. And for the first time in decades, Ashmore had reason to believe that justice was no longer just a distant promise. From that moment, Jem began the greatest task of his life. Not catching criminals, but cleaning out the very house he once thought was safe. 1 week after the official dismissal of Deputy Troy Beckett was announced, Ashmore entered a strange quiet. Not one of confusion, but a quiet hope. People no longer whispered outside laundromats or grocery stores. Instead, they waited. And Jeremiah Jem Delaney knew it was time to do more than discipline. It was time to begin healing. He proposed holding an open town meeting, not in the stiff halls of city council or the mistrusted walls of the precinct, but at First Baptist Church on Persimmon Street, where his parents were once married. It was sacred ground, a place people turned to when they needed forgiveness or a new beginning. That Thursday evening, the wooden pews of the church quickly filled. There were elderly men in worn-out suits, young women holding babies, high schoolers with backpacks still on, and even police officers attending not as enforcers, but as listeners. Jem stepped up to the modest pulpit. No uniform, no stack of files, just a microphone and a heart ready to speak. He glanced down to the third pew, where Ruth Delaney, his mother, once publicly humiliated, sat in her usual seat. She wore a simple beige cardigan, her silver hair neatly pinned. Her gaze held no resentment, only pride and peace. "We're not here to repeat our mistakes," Jem began, his voice steady like a prayer. "We're here to admit them, to talk, and to heal." He spoke about the reopened files, the feedback from the community, and the unflinching internal investigations. But what held the crowd silent was when he said, "None of us, not even a sheriff or a front desk clerk, has the right to forget someone's dignity just because we wear a uniform." A woman stood. It was Etta Mae Vaughn. "I used to think I'd die without anyone ever hearing my voice," she said. "Today, I know at least my sheriff is listening." Then a young boy raised his hand. "If I get scolded by a cop for no reason, can I say something?" The whole church chuckled softly. Jem nodded. "Not only can you speak up, but someone will write it down and make sure no one gets ignored anymore." After the meeting, townspeople stayed behind, shaking hands, sharing stories, signing up for the new Civilian Oversight Council. An elderly woman handed Jem a tin of coconut cookies, saying, "Not to forgive, but to remind you to keep going." That night, as Jem and Ruth returned home, she sat by the window, watching the moon peek through passing clouds. She whispered, "That day, I didn't just see my son as sheriff. I saw him as a man who knows how to love his community." Jem took her hand. "I didn't do it alone. You were the one who started it all." And so, in a quiet corner of the American South, a community began its first real steps toward becoming kinder. Not because it had never done wrong, but because it chose to make things right, together. Under the soft morning sky of early April, Jeremiah Jem Delaney stood on the steps of the Ashmore County Sheriff's Department. In front of him were nearly 100 townspeople, young and old, black and white, local-born, and those who had returned just to witness something that had never happened before, the public unveiling of the department's new comprehensive reform charter. There were no flashy banners, no music or red streamers, just a simple wooden podium, a single microphone, and a 2-inch thick document in Jem's hands. The reform manual he and his team had built over weeks of investigation, reflection, and listening. Jem lifted his gaze, sweeping it slowly across the crowd. Less than 2 months ago, he began, voice clear and deliberate. A small 79-year-old woman walked into this building with a simple belief that if her son was a sheriff, this place would be safe. She was wrong, and I was wrong for letting it happen. The crowd went silent, hanging on his every word. But from that mistake, we now have the chance to start again. I'm not here just to apologize. I'm here to change things. He raised the document higher, his voice steadier. Starting next month, every officer in the Ashmore County Sheriff's Department will undergo a bi-monthly performance review, with at least one field audit conducted by civilian representatives. All complaints will be recorded, prioritized, and responded to within 10 business days. No more internal hush-hush resolutions. All responses will be published quarterly in public reports. In the back of the crowd, Etta Mae Vaughn gave a quiet nod. Her face glowed with the contentment of someone who had waited decades to see justice find its footing. No one, and I repeat, no one, will be granted immunity because of their rank or because they're someone. Justice does not accept favors. Justice only accepts truth. Applause broke out, not thunderous, but strong enough to make someone feel that hope had just found its way home. Jem stepped back from the mic. In the front row, he saw his mother, Ruth Delaney, seated proudly. Her eyes met his, not with words, just a small nod. And in that nod was everything. The faith that the son she had raised with callous hands had kept his promise. It was the start of a new chapter, not just for Ashmore, but for every place that had ever believed change was impossible. Because when justice has a face, a name, and someone willing to carry it in their heart, it can never be forgotten